Welcome to Velvet Confessions. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button. We tell the stories people are afraid to say out loud. And before we begin, drop a comment and let us know what city you're watching from tonight. We love knowing who's out there listening. Now, let's talk about what happened at the Hartwell Foundation dinner last October. Because this one still keeps people talking. She didn't cry when she found out. That's the part that surprised everyone who knew her. Margaux Elliot stood in the kitchen of the house she had designed herself. Every cabinet, every sightline, every inch of travertine chosen by her own hand, and she looked at the photograph on her husband's unlocked phone, and she simply exhaled, long and slow, like someone setting down something very heavy they had been carrying for a very long time. The woman in the photo was wearing Margaux's bracelet. Not a bracelet that resembled hers, not a similar style, not the same design her bracelet, the one her grandmother Elspeth had brought from Edinburgh in 1962. The one with the 3 interlocked gold rings and the tiny sapphire clasp that had been repaired twice and still sat slightly crooked to the left. The one Margaux had worn on her, the one she had not been able to find for 11 weeks and had quietly, privately grieved, assuming she had lost it somewhere between the airport and the hotel during that conference in Montreal. She had not lost it. Her husband had taken it. His name was Theodore. Theo to everyone who loved him. And there had been a time, a long and genuine time, when Margaux had been among those people. They had been married for 14 years. He was a partner at a commercial real estate firm in Toronto. He coached their sons' hockey on Saturday mornings and made very good risotto, and had a laugh that came from somewhere deep and real, or at least Margaux had believed that last part. She set the phone face down on the counter. She put the kettle on, and then she sat at the kitchen island where she had eaten 10,000 breakfasts, and she thought, not about Theo, not yet, but about the bracelet, about the fact that it had been sitting on someone else's wrist for 11 weeks. That someone had been clasping and unclasping that crooked little sapphire every morning, had been reaching past it to pour her coffee, had been letting it catch the light. Margaux thought about her grandmother, about Elspeth's hands, about the way some objects carry people inside them. And she made a decision. She was going to the Hartwell Foundation dinner. She was going to wear the blue Givenchy she had bought in February and never found an occasion for. She was going to drink exactly 1 glass of Sancerre at the reception and eat the salmon and smile at the right people. And she was going to get her bracelet back. Here is what you need to understand about Margaux before the rest of this story makes sense. She had not always been the woman who could sit quietly with information like that and do nothing. There had been a version of her, younger, sharper in the brittle way rather than the strong way, who would have confronted, demanded, dissolved. She knew that version of herself well. She had been that person through her first job, through her father's illness, through the miscarriage they never spoke about publicly, through 3 years of fertility treatments that Theo had attended with the particular careful attentiveness of a man who was trying very hard and occasionally resented having to try. But something had shifted in her, somewhere in her 40s. She didn't know exactly when. She only knew that she had learned, slowly, at a cost, that the people who act first rarely control what happens next. And Margaux's had always been at her core, someone who wanted to control what happened next. She worked as an architectural consultant for a heritage preservation firm. She had spent 15 years learning how to look at something that appeared to be falling apart and find, beneath the damage, the original structure. The bones that could hold again, if you simply stopped applying the wrong pressures. She was very good at it. She had, it turned out, been practicing for something. The Hartwell Foundation dinner was held every year at the Royal Ontario Museum, in the main hall beneath the enormous suspended whale skeleton that Margaux's had always found quietly magnificent. It raised money for arts education in Northern Ontario communities. Margaux's had been on the committee for 6 years. She knew the florist, the caterer, the woman who always burned the bread rolls slightly and apologized with great sincerity every year. She arrived at 7:15. Alone. She had told Theo she was going, and he had said he might stop by later, which she had known. In the way you know things, "You are not ready to say aloud," meant he would not be coming at all. He had somewhere else to be. The hall was already full. Champagne on trays. The low murmur of several hundred people doing the social arithmetic of who to approach, and who to avoid, and who to see and be seen. With Margaux moved through it easily. She had been moving through rooms like this for 20 years. She spotted the woman in 40 minutes. Her name, Margaux, had learned, through a conversation with a colleague's assistant that had been much less casual than it appeared, was Sabrina Okafor, 29 years old, junior associate at a development consultancy that shared a floor with Theo's firm. Very beautiful in the specific way that made people underestimate her intelligence, which Margaux suspected was an error. The photo on Theo's phone had shown a woman who did not look uncertain. Sabrina was standing near the far pillar with two other young women, all three of them doing the practiced thing of appearing not to be scanning the room while absolutely scanning the room. She was wearing a black wrap dress and the gold bracelet on her left wrist, and it sat slightly crooked, the way it always did, catching the chandelier light above the whale. Margaux did not walk toward her. She turned the opposite direction and found Gordon Hartwell, the Foundation's chair, 72, a man who had known Margaux's father and therefore treated her with the particular warmth reserved for people whose entire family you've watched grow up. And she had a very nice 20-minute conversation with him about the new initiative in Sudbury, and whether the provincial funding would actually arrive in Q2 or whether Q4 was more realistic. She smiled. She listened. She was present in every way that mattered, and with one part of her mind she watched Sabrina Okafor across the room. Theo arrived at 8:45. Margaux saw him come in from the north entrance, which was not the entrance most guests used, which told her he had been here before and knew the layout. He was in a navy suit she didn't recognize. He had bought a suit she didn't know about. That detail, somehow, landed harder than most of the others. He saw Sabrina before he saw Margaux. She watched his face do the thing that a face does when it sees what it wants, a small loosening, an open, gone in a half-second. Then he composed himself and began working the room in the way he always did, handshakes and shoulder clasps, and the deep laugh she had once thought was entirely genuine. He had not seen her yet. Margaux excused herself from the conversation she was in and walked not quickly, not slowly, to the bar. She ordered water with lemon. She stood where she could be seen from most of the room and waited. It took him 4 minutes to find her. She watched it register on his face. The small recalibration. He had not expected her to be here, or perhaps he had expected her to be somewhere else. In conversation, across the room, not here, not at this particular angle, where she could have seen everything that had happened in the last 30 seconds. "Margaux," he said, and smiled, and came to her and kissed her cheek. "You look beautiful." "Gordon was asking about you," she said. "He wants to talk to you about the Rosedale project. I told him I'd pass it on." They talked for 8 minutes. She asked about his drive over. He asked about her week. It was a conversation made entirely of surfaces, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. Then she said, "I should go find Priya before the dinner seating. Will you be all right?" And he said, "Yes, of course, go ahead." And she turned and walked, and went not to find Priya, but to find Sabrina Okafor. Sabrina was alone by the time Margaux reached her. The two other women had drifted away. She had a glass of wine in her right hand, and she was looking at her phone with the particular expression of someone waiting for a message. "They aren't sure we'll come." Margaux stopped beside her and looked up at the whale. "Remarkable, isn't it?" she said, in the easy, slightly abstracted way of someone making conversation at an event. 42 years it's been hanging there. Most of the people in this room weren't born yet." Sabrina looked up. She smiled. "It's incredible. I've been at these dinners for 2 years, and I still stare at it every time." "Same?" Margaux turned slightly and extended her hand. "Margaux Elliot. I'm on the Foundation Committee." Sabrina Okafor. She shifted her wine to shake hands. The bracelet slid slightly on her wrist as she did. Margaux felt something in her chest, not rage, not grief, something quieter than either. Recognition. She looked at it for exactly 1 moment, no longer. "What a beautiful bracelet," she said, and she watched Sabrina's face. There it was, the flicker. Not guilt, not quite. Not yet, but something that lived near it. A small intake, a shift in the eyes, the expression of someone whose mind has just moved very fast, landing somewhere uncomfortable. "Thank you," Sabrina said. "It was a gift. It's quite distinctive," Margaux said pleasantly. "The interlocked ring design. I've only ever seen it in antique Scottish jewelry, usually Edinburgh late 1950s, early 60s. The sapphire clasp is lovely, slightly off-center. They all were, those makers. Each one was handmade." The silence that followed was approximately 3 seconds long. "Did you?" Sabrina started. "My grandmother brought it from Edinburgh in 1962, Margaux said. "I wore it on my wedding day. I've been looking for it for about 11 weeks. She said it the same way she had said everything else, calm, conversational. "The way she might have said the salmon tonight is quite good, or I think they've changed the floral arrangement from last year." Sabrina's face had gone very still. "I didn't know," she said. Her voice was quiet. She was not the kind of person who performed innocence, Margaux realized. Whatever she was feeling right now was real. "I believe you," Margaux said, and she did, or she believed it at least partially, which was enough. "I'm not asking you to explain anything. I'm only asking for it back." Sabrina unclasped the bracelet without hesitating. It took her a moment, the small clasp ever slightly crooked, stubborn the way it always was. And then she placed it in Margaux's open hand. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were bright in a way that was not quite tears. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know," Margaux said. She looked down at the bracelet in her palm. The 3 interlocked rings, the sapphire, slightly off-center, the way it had always been. Then she looked back up at Sabrina. "You should know," she said gently, without warmth and without cruelty, "that you are not the first. And if you are still where you are 6 months from now, you will wish you had made a different choice tonight." She did not wait for an answer. She put the bracelet on her own wrist and walked toward the dinner hall where her table was waiting. The salmon was, in fact, very good. Margaux sat between Gordon and a woman named Patricia Drummond, who ran a strings program for Indigenous youth in Thunder Bay, and she was genuinely interested in what Patricia had to say, and she asked real questions, and the conversation was alive in a way that felt, she noticed this, like something she had not felt at a dinner. In a long time across the room, she was aware, without looking, that Theo was at another table, that he had been watching her, probably since she walked back in, that somewhere in the arithmetic of his evening, something had not added up. She let him do that arithmetic on his own. After dessert, a very good tarte tatin, which she noted mentally to tell the committee chair. The lights dimmed for the presentation, a video played. Children in a gymnasium in Kenora, making music. A girl of about 9 or 10 with a cello nearly as tall as she was, concentrating with her whole face. Margaux thought about her grandmother again, about things that are carried, about what gets passed on and what gets taken. She turned the bracelet on her wrist, the way she always had, and felt the clasp, still crooked, still stubborn, and felt something settle. They drove home separately. She had known they would. She was in the kitchen when she heard his car, then his key, then his footsteps. He appeared in the doorway of the kitchen with his jacket over his arm, and he looked at her wrist, and he said nothing. "I think," Margaux said without turning from the window, "we should talk tomorrow. Not tonight. I'm tired, and these conversations deserve to be had when both people are present." She heard him put his jacket on the chair. "Margaux, tomorrow, Theo." He went upstairs. She made herself a cup of tea. She barely drank and stood in the house she had designed herself and let the stillness of it do what stillness does. What followed was not quick. These things never are when they're done correctly, and Margaux had decided, in the kitchen, the night she found the photograph, that this was going to be done correctly. She called her lawyer the next morning. Her lawyer's name was Harriet Novak, and she had been recommended by a friend 3 years ago for something unrelated, and Margaux had liked her immediately for the way she asked questions that seemed to cut through to the actual structure of a problem, the way Margaux herself did with buildings. She had not expected to need her for this. She called anyway. Harriet was the first person Margaux told. Not her sister, not her closest friend, not her mother, who was 78 and worried too much already. She told Harriet, and Harriet listened without interrupting for a long time, and then she said, "All right, Before you say anything to him, I want to understand the financial picture. The financial picture, as it turned out, was more complicated than Margaux had expected. She had always trusted Theo with the accounts they shared, not because she was careless, but because she was busy, and because trust is sometimes its own form of willful blindness. She had missed things, not through naivety, but through a kind of faith that had been, apparently, misplaced. There were accounts she hadn't known about, not enormous, not dramatic, but deliberate. She would learn later. Months later, after the documents had been reviewed, and the lawyers had to what lawyers do, that he had been slowly, quietly moving money for approximately 3 years. Not embezzlement exactly, their finances were shared, technically there was legal gray area, but a kind of preparation. A building of exits she hadn't known were being built. He had known this was ending before she had. That was the part she kept coming back to, not the money. The timeline. The 3 years of mornings and dinners and hockey practices and risotto and laughter that had happened on top of this other thing, simultaneously, invisibly. She wasn't sure which part of that was worse, she told her son 3 weeks later. His name was James. He was 17, a grade 12 student at Rosedale who played defense and had his grandmother Elspeth's coloring. And the particular combination of emotional intelligence and teenage stubbornness that meant conversations with him were simultaneously the most worthwhile and most exhausting things in Margaux's life. He did not cry. He went very quiet, and then he said, "Did you know for a long time?" "A few weeks," she said. "Before or after the Hartwell dinner?" She paused. "Why?" "Because you wore the blue dress," he said, "and you never wear the blue dress unless something matters." She looked at her son for a moment, at the particular steadiness in his face. "You're very perceptive. You taught me to look at things properly." He was quiet again. Then, "Is the bracelet back?" "Yes." "Good," he said, like that was the part that had worried him most, like everything else could be worked through, but that had needed to be resolved. She loved him, suddenly and completely, in the way she had loved him since he was 3 days old, and opened his eyes for the first time in the NICU and looked at her with the ancient, exhausted calm of someone who has just arrived from somewhere very far away. The separation was filed in January. Theo moved to a rental in the annex. Harriet was methodical and thorough and extremely effective, and the financial settlement, once the full scope of what had been quietly accumulated was documented, reflected. Margaux kept the house. She had designed it. That had never been in question. She kept the bracelet. That had never been in question either. She did not feel triumphant. She had not wanted to win anything. She had wanted not to have needed to. Those are different things. And it took her a long time, longer than she would have liked, to stop grieving the distinction. But there were other things, quieter things, that she had not expected. Almost immediately, she noticed it the first week, and was almost embarrassed by how literal it was, how the body knows what the mind is still arguing about. She went back to work with a focus she hadn't felt in years. A heritage project in Hamilton, a 1920s textile mill being converted to cultural space, absorbed her in the best possible way. The bones were good. She could see it. She spent 3 months doing what she did best, which was looking at something that appeared broken and understanding what it had always, structurally, been capable of. Patricia Drummond, the woman she'd met at the Hartwell dinner, sent her a note in February about the strings program. Would Margaux be interested in consulting on a small renovation for their rehearsal space in Thunder Bay? The budget was nothing spectacular. The project itself was. She said yes without hesitating. In March, she ran into Sabrina at a coffee shop near King Street. She would not have planned it. She might have avoided it if given the choice. But there it was. Sabrina was ahead of her in the line, half-turned, and they saw each other at the same moment with no time to prepare. Sabrina looked older. Not unwell, but as though something had happened to her understanding of herself, the way it sometimes shows on a face. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Margaux said. There was a pause in which the entire coffee shop seemed to become very quiet, or perhaps that was simply Margaux's attention narrowing. "I wanted to." Sabrina stopped. "Started again. I ended it, a few months ago, before any of the legal stuff." Margaux nodded. "I don't know if that matters to you," Sabrina said. I wanted you to know." It matters, Margaux said honestly. Not because it changed anything about the marriage, or the money, or the 3 years of exits being quietly constructed, but because there are choices people make when things are hard, and this had been one. She ordered her coffee. Sabrina ordered hers. They did not sit together. That was not what this moment was. But as Margaux turned to leave, she paused. The program. In Thunder Bay, she said. The strings program for the kids. Patricia Drummond runs it. If you're ever looking for somewhere to put some volunteer hours, she's a good person to know. She did not wait to see Sabrina's expression. She walked out into the March air, still, sharp and bright with the last of winter, her breath in small clouds ahead of her. She had the bracelet. She had the house. She had the Hamilton Mill and the Thunder Bay rehearsal space, and her son who wore the blue dress and everything else as a kind of compass. She walked to her car and she drove north, and she did not look back.